uh, it's great to have David Bruce here tonight with session two, getting prepared for SKP Camp. And David, it's great to have you, my friend.
Thank you, Bart. And Bart, were you able to set me up as co-host?
Let me just double check. It says so. Yes. Give it a try.
Oh, look at that. You have trusted me with the power. Thank you, my
Come
friend.
on, man. You got it.
So I gotta be honest, I gotta get something out of the way before we get started, guys. First of all, one reason why I'm in the space I am in my life today is because God has provided many, many mentors, many, many good men that either invested me directly or several men that had a great impact indirectly. One person that had a direct impact is on our screens today. Brian Plemel has been just a dear, dear friend who has just had some great soul-to-soul talks with me over many, many years. And then one mentor that's had a huge impact on me that I've never met until tonight is David Tackle. And David Tackle, I just have to say thank you, my friend. I have done your forming class probably 10 times, at least 10 times. And I just want to thank you. I've never met you before, and so I feel honored just to have a chance to say thank you for how you've had an impact, giving me a life of sailing instead of rowing. So thank you very, very much. Bless you,
Wow.
sir. That was hopefully worth coming tonight. All right. There we go. Thank you, sir. All right, so with that, I'm going to share my slides here for a few minutes, and we're going to start with where we stopped last time. And if you guys remember, we shared some wisdom from Mr. Rogers. Let me let me minimize something here. For some reason, I lost my mouse. Okay, emotions that are mentionable are manageable. And that was one reason why I was really wanting us to download that app to make sure. Hold on a second. Let me stop sharing here for a second. My apologies, but I get too many faces on the right side and then I can't see what I'm doing here. Okay. Okay. Emotions that are mentionable are manageable. And I just think as Christian men, I think we really have to have growing confidence that our emotions are not a problem, that they were created by God with great, great purpose. And I think one reason why this is really important is especially our young men, our boys in our lives. Their world is very impacted by emotions, and they really need those safe venues to talk about those things. And unfortunately, when I was growing up, I think my dad, because he had not had a lot of exposure and having conversations with men in his life about emotions, he wasn't really available to talk about these things. And that just opened up a huge uh, vacuum in my heart that got filled later with things like pornography and some of the other things that Bart just talked about. But the app that I mentioned last time is it's actually designed by the Yale Institute for Emotional Intelligence. If you haven't had a chance to download that app, I really want to encourage you to download that, especially before the camp, just so you're kind of familiar with it. And I obviously won't be using it at the camp because Bart, we're phones free, right? When we're at
Phone's
the
free.
camp.
You bet.
Oh man, just feel that for a second, guys.
Hmm.
2 or 3 days without a phone. Just think about that. And hopefully you're not having a panic attack right now. But anyway, it's going to be good. It is good for our souls to be unplugged. But this is a tool that you can have before and after the camp that I think will be very helpful. So this is kind of a recap of what we looked at last time, the two areas of the brain that I try to help my clients know. And when I've worked with teens, I do the same thing with teenagers. I think if they can understand these two primary areas of the brain and how they work together and how they don't work together, it can actually form a lot of good decisions. And you can make better decisions if you know how your brain works. So we have the limbic system, which is where all of our emotions come from, our reward center, Our relationships or our social networks are right there in the limbic system, long-term memory. And then that little red dot at the base of your limbic system is your fight or flight response kit that is always monitoring whether you are safe or not. And then over there on the left side with a big X on it, and I'll explain the X in a minute, is where we see sort of the more higher complex functions of the brain: judgment, decision making, impulse control, planning, strategizing. And a lot of good neuroscience has come in just the last couple of decades that validates that when we do spiritual practices like prayer, meditating over text, just deep breathing, practicing silence, we see a lot of consistent brain scans telling us that the prefrontal cortex gets a little active in those activities, and the limbic system actually calms down, which is like the sweet spot that we want. So on the top here, I wrote, if we know how porn works, you can replace it better. And so what I want to say about that is pornography or drug use. One thing that those two things have in common is those are very, very strong resources that activate the reward center of the limbic system. In other words, when you're looking at pornography or you're using a substance, it releases an excess amount of dopamine in the brain. And what we talked about last time is how the brain only has a certain amount of energy at one point. So if in one moment I have a lot of activity going on in my limbic system, simultaneously I'm taking away activity or energy from the prefrontal cortex. So you can think about that if you were high on marijuana or drinking too much alcohol, your reward center is really, really active, and that activates your whole limbic system. And then we start losing access to all those functions of the prefrontal cortex. So what we talk about when we're talking about, let's just focus on pornography here for a minute. One thing we say is that pornography, it's solving a problem with a problem. And what I mean by that, and I'll just speak from personal experience, one of my big issue when I was really trapped in the issue of porn addiction is I thought I had a porn problem, but it turned out I didn't have a porn problem. I had undealt with and unmanaged emotions, and I had undealt with and unresolved relationship dynamics, both present and historical, that I had not looked at. And so what ended up happening is I had a lot of things going on in my life. If I got really, really angry, or if I got really, really sad, I'd feel really uncomfortable with those feelings. I wouldn't know what to do with them. And so I got relief from those emotions by resorting to lust and then pursuing things like pornography or masturbating. And so I had emotional stuff that I wasn't learning, but I kept fixing it with pornography, right? Or I had relationship dynamics. I had, conflicts with people, and I didn't know how to assert myself very well. I didn't know how to, articulate things clearly when I had tensions, either with my family or with coworkers. And so at the end of my day, I've had 3 or 4 conflicts that I didn't know how to deal with. And the only way that I knew how to really get relief and resolve that was to keep going back to my quote unquote drug of choice, which is pornography. So Bart asked me a good question here earlier today about, strategies to deal with pornography. Well, first of all, I want to say, I think we have to make sure we identify what the real problem is. Because if we think the problem is just pornography, we can remove pornography. You can put software on your computers and you may never look at pornography for years and years and years, or you may protect your kid from ever being exposed to that, which would be good, maybe. But if we remove pornography and we don't address the issues that produced the desire and produced the longing for things like pornography, then we're not really experiencing wholeness and healing. And that's really what God, I think, wants for us. And by giving that to us, He allows us the opportunity to introduce that to our sons, and we can bless our sons. One of my favorite experts on pornography recovery and sexual integrity is Jay Stringer. And here's a couple of quotes I want that are related to parenting. What an adolescent may actually need is for both parents to be present in his life and free him to pursue a type of life that fills him with meaning. When this does not happen, the enmeshed parent will inevitably set up another round of rebellion for the child. So what he's talking about here is when we can be overly involved and overly directive with our kids. In other words, we've decided what is meaningful and we've decided what is important. And we may not necessarily be connecting with our kid, right? So again, I think the answer to this dilemma is as dads to really develop really healthy, open-minded curiosity about our kids. Ask more questions than giving directions or answers. I'm not saying don't give directions. I'm not saying you don't have answers. Of course you do. But to really introduce those with asking a lot of questions and showing real healthy curiosity toward your kid and whatever's going on with them. Another thought, lust blooms in the soil of disengagement. And this resonates with the quote or the stats that Bart introduced at the beginning of our time together. There are generations of young men growing up without men engaged in their story. And there are consequences when we are not given engagement as young men. And I said this last time, this is one reason why I so admire all of you that are going to participate in this camp, because this is just one example of how you are choosing engagement. You are choosing connection with your kid, and that is outstanding. But disengagement, it plants the seeds of lust because the child who is made by God to experience tenderness and delight recognizes that familial love is not something that can be depended on. So, in other words, whenever there is disengagement, those gaps get filled, and that young man or that young boy starts losing confidence in the tenderness and delight that he needs to experience with you and with other good men in his story. So, one thing I like to do with really good quotes is I like to spice them up a little bit to kind of resonate a little bit more. And so I took that quote and I just wanted to apply it to us. Let's not look at it as parenting, but let's just talk about being men. Lust can bloom in the soil of disengagement. If I become disengaged, disengagement plants the seeds of lust because the man who is made to experience tenderness and delight with God perceives that God's love is not something that can be depended on. And I think this is just a really good way of understanding how important it is that we make certain that we're having our own experiences with God's tenderness and delight. Because if we're not experiencing that tenderness and delight with God, it's going to be very difficult to transfer that and share that and inspire our kids that God's tenderness and delight is absolutely something to depend on. So, like I mentioned earlier, pornography and lust is a reward center issue in the limbic system, right? That's kind of a symptom of sometimes other things going on in the limbic system, whether it's emotions that a young man is dealing with or that we're dealing with, or relationship dynamics that we aren't dealing with and feeling successful with. So, three principles that I really like to tell dads is when it comes to, let's say, pornography use, let's say you find out that your son, has been exposed to this or has been using this. What's super important is that we emphasize why something is happening more than what. And this has been kind of my experience working with a lot of Christian families is that when stuff like this shows up, we're all hands on deck to address and confront and demolish the what. But if we do that too intensely and too directly, we never get to the more important questions in terms of why. Okay. And trust me, the answers to the why is where there are often some really, really important areas that need to be brought into the light, need tenderness and kindness and understanding, as opposed to just removing, the pornography or whatever has come into play. The other thing that's super important is, and this is one reason why I think camp is going to be so helpful, is that when it comes to goals in life, pursuit goals are far more effective than avoiding goals. And these are some of the strategies that I have experienced that did not work very well for many years. So I thought, one, I realized, okay, pornography is wrong. So I need to get that out of my life. So I would do that. So I avoided pornography. Well, having a daily goal of avoiding something, it starts creating a real dilemma because the brain takes goals and somehow automatically has a setup where it tries to track the progress of our goals. So if I tell all of you to, after this appointment, or after this meeting tonight, I want you to not think about purple elephants. Okay, just don't think about them and make sure that every day this week you don't think about purple elephants. Well, we're going to have a purple elephant problem by the end of the week, right? So when it comes to things like pornography, yes, we need to avoid certain things, but we have to have a huge, vibrant menu of what we are pursuing, right? What types of connections are we pursuing? What types of hobbies are we pursuing? What passions does your kid have? Is it a passion for a sport? Is it a passion for music or something that he enjoys? Like we've got to really make sure we're supporting our young men with the things that they can pursue that will really fulfill them. And then lastly, connection is much more important than sobriety. We talk about I'm an addiction counselor as well, and we talk about how a lot of neuroscience supports today that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but the opposite of addiction is connection. The more ways that we experience connection, both relationally with God, relationally with other men or other peers, the more connections we have, that provides a really healthy deposit into that limbic system. And the more connections we have, the more security our young men are going to feel, the more security I feel when I have connections with good men and a good relationship with God going on. That is a essential ingredient for my peace and my security. So, I want to ask for a few guesses here. The best tool for brain regulation and interpersonal connection is what? Would anyone like to guess what that is? And please don't say Advil or something like that. Any guesses? What's something you think might be helpful for the brain? An activity or something?
Rest or sleep, maybe.
Oh, okay. That's not a wrong answer. That's a good answer, Fred. Okay. Rest is good. That's really good.
How about
Any
just
others?
hanging out with somebody?
Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. That's very good. Hanging out with people. That's a good one. One more.
What about communication? Talking.
Oh, I think Fred, you're describing the whole tree more or less, but here's the answer because Fred nailed
Okay.
it. And actually Bart's answer is also there.
Oh,
Story. Story. When I've had a rough day at work, right? Or a challenging situation happened at work. When I go later and I hang out with someone and I'm talking to them about that incident, I'm telling them the story of my challenging event at work. In order to do that, I have to access my prefrontal cortex, which holds my short-term memory and all the details of what was happening that day. And at the same time, I have to access emotions that told me that this was a challenging day and that there were things that were not great about my day. The emotions are very informative. Okay. So when you tell stories, you literally are going back and forth between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system to create cohesion between all the things that you felt and all the things that you thought in that circumstance. I think story is another reason why it was one of Jesus's, primary teaching tools. It was story, because story involves facts and feelings all kind of meshing together. And so stories are very, very sticky. So one thing that we're going to do, one exercise that we're going to do at camp is I'm going to actually give you a really cool hack on how to not only tell a story, but how to get stories out of your voice. Okay. Because stories, sometimes we can be a little intimidated. We can think, oh gosh, I don't know how to tell good stories, or yeah, I don't know where to start. All that intimidation about being able to tell a good story is going to be resolved with the hack that I'm going to give you at camp. So, stories are really important. And I think Fred and Bart, you nailed it. Yeah, just even men coming together and talking and telling stories, hearing stories and your own story being witnessed, it creates incredible connection. And connection is something that is a really good solution to a lot of the things that we've talked about here tonight that are problems. If I'd had someone to tell my stories with, I think that would have definitely liberated me much earlier in my life when I was so struggling with things like pornography and lust because I just had no outlets to get understood. And this is something that we can provide one another, and we can definitely provide it to our young men. Okay, I think that is it for me, Bart.
Beautiful, David. We're going to turn the recording off. You guys, if you have questions you want to bring to the table, again, this hour is just meant to scratch the surface, honestly. But if you want to come forward and say, hey guys, I could use your prayers. I'm really personally having some issues with some of these things we're talking about. Well, guess what? You have found a loving, safe container tonight. Again, here goes the recording. It is